sit up there.
This is the little
Call to order the session, council study session for January 8th. Wish everybody a happy new year.
Yeah.
It's been nearly a month since we've been together, so glad to see you all came back. So we have
an option.
none of that optional. So we have a full agenda tonight. We've got making up for lost time on a couple items. So we're going to start off with the performance review for our judge. Judge Belvin is our municipal court judge, and it's the council's responsibility to, you are one of our appointees, review you every 2 years. Contract that. So this year we had a council committee that was by council, elector, and councilmember Faye. And then we have some questions, and what we want to do is there's 7 questions, ideally, ironically, and 7 of us. So we'll go around, and each of us will gather some information from you. And the council will take some time to, outside of this meeting, to kind of work through those questions, work through meeting, and the input that's been received, your self-eval, and then submit. Each of us will submit our comments to the HR, who will then meet back again with our and contract changes that we will then bring to the council meeting on the 18th. So that's the process. I want to thank Councilwoman Schlechter and Bay for the work that they put in on this and the extra time and the thoughtfulness. That process looks like a very good process. These things add a little bit to the schedule, but I appreciate the work you guys do. So, no further ado, Judge.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much. Thank you, members of the council, mayor, and citizens. Well, just give a brief overview of the court, just to give some context to what's going on. And of course, at the most basic level, council makes the laws for the city, the ordinances. The police department enforces the ordinances, at least the criminal ordinances. The city attorney, prosecutor, prosecutes violations. Defender on contract who defends those accused who can't afford. And of course, the judges adjudicate cases that are brought before the court. We do have a lot of overlap cases with misdemeanor cases under the state law. There's our own set of ordinances. Police do have the choice sometimes, depending on the severity of the filing cases with the county court or even the district court. But having said that, we do have a fair number of cases. We have a variety of cases. The schedule of court meetings on Monday mornings and afternoons. second and fourth Thursdays, juvenile docket. This is a new thing. They started up last year during 2018. We're still used to it. Judge Huffine, one of the associate judges, is the juvenile docket. It's an interest of hers and has been 30 plus years she's been a judge. So she is working collaboratively, works in with me on designing how the juvenile docket should be. We moved from just mornings on Mondays and first and the second and fourth Thursdays to the afternoons also, so that avoid sitting around a lot waiting for it, so we can stretch it out a little bit, so somewhat minimize waiting time. We're still working on tweaks on that. Judge Huffine is working on resources we can use for juvenile offenders. So that's kind of where we are with what we do. And the statistics briefly are that last year we had, through December 10th, 1,021 misdemeanor cases, that is non-traffic cases. These are jailable offenses by and large, except for the drug paraphernalia and marijuana cases. These are adult cases, over 5,000 traffic cases. Those can be adult or juvenile, and 3,300 parking tickets, which is down from the year before, partially because we haven't had a parking officer all the time during the year, so that's how that enforcement comes. Of our misdemeanor cases, of the 1,021, 314 last year were domestic violence cases, and those are a small number of our overall cases, but they are the most time-intensive cases, and they ought to be. Those are the cases that have the potential to be most disruptive to our community and to the citizens in our community. And we have a good program where they are seen, domestic violence alleged offenders are seen in video from the Arapahoe County Jail the next court morning, and we have the victim hopefully present, and we try to adjudicate those cases quickly, but that's just the beginning of the process. If they do indeed plead guilty and are put on probation, those are the cases where we spend most of our probation reviews. All of the cases that we handle are important. I just think the domestic violence cases happen to need probably the most intensive work from all parties. Prosecutors do a good job on those cases, really understanding what's going on in the case of the probation officer. So that's the context of what we do. One thing that we've done that really stands out, there's several things, is that because of a change in state law, we were required to have counsel representing indigent people at first appearance, and in custody people are almost certainly by law deemed to be indigent unless they've hired their own attorney, and they have the option of having a public defender represent them. So we have one attorney and a couple of our main contractor and a couple of others who are available too. And I think that helps the cases too. I think it promotes more justice, and it also, I think, helps to move cases along without sacrificing fairness. And there's a state fund that was established to help municipal courts with meeting this statutory requirement. Our court supervisor, Rachel, has, with the support of Wendy, made applications through grants, and we've been very successful. We've received $30,000 back already from the fund, and we've got another $30,000 in the pipeline, and there's still money going to be throughout 2019 and maybe beyond. So I think in the interest of time, that's what I've got in terms of overview.
Okay, so Judge, we have 7 questions, and I'm just going to have each council member ask a question. Do you mind starting? Yeah, no worries. Pat?
Yeah, Judge, would you share a couple highlights this year, or 2018?
Well, I think, of course, one of the highlights is that I think we're pretty smoothly functioning court. Our personnel were new 2 years ago when I was here, and we've stabilized. We've got a good court supervisor. Our court clerks have really caught on to things, and they're diligent and customer service oriented, and we get good support from Wendy and council and the city. And to me, just being able to function like that is a real highlight. Getting the public defender on board is a very big highlight too, because it's something I think really makes us into an even fairer court operation for the defendants and to the citizens and the victims. I think justice is not as delayed as it might otherwise be, since we have the services of the public defender now.
Thanks. Are there any milestones or bright successes you'd like to share with us in this past year?
Well, I think getting the juvenile docket off the ground is really important. I've always been uncomfortable with having the juveniles and the adults sitting in the same room at the same time, having to have their lives opened up in that type of a setting. And the way we work things, we have a waiting room where we can actually keep each juvenile separated to an extent so they don't hear each other's business too much, although it's a public court, obviously, and anyone can listen to whatever they would like to listen to. But I think that having a real framework for a juvenile court is really exciting. It's very heartening to see. And as I said, Judge Huffine is very committed to it. The prosecutor is committed to handling those cases differently than the adult cases, recognizing that there are different needs for different ages of people that get in trouble. And again, having a public defender has just made a big difference. It's made us much more efficient, just on the video advisements we do. So that's essentially it.
Quick follow-up to that. Do you see any common root causes to most juvenile offenses? And is there, apart from having a separate docket, something that the court system can do to help reduce some of these offenses?
I think there's so many societal issues. There are family breakdowns, of course. There's the prevalence of drugs. I don't know that I'm too much on the fact that marijuana is so much more readily available that it's got to be a factor in the number of juveniles we see now. And I think we have a pretty diverse demographic in Littleton, as you all know, and there are some kids who come from rough circumstances, and I think we see some of them, and hopefully some of the programs that Judge Huffine is engaging with will help out. She's had some discussion with the Arapahoe County District Attorney's juvenile diversion program, and they will take on juveniles that we send, even though they aren't their cases. So hopefully that will help us to focus on the kids who really need some help. But it's a challenge. Some kids get caught in the middle. The case isn't serious enough to merit maybe going through the whole district court juvenile process, but it's serious enough that we have to have some involvement, so they sometimes get caught in the middle.
Share your thoughts on your working relationships with your business partners within the city. I think this probably relates to the community service work options that you provide?
The community service is, we refer that to the Arapahoe County Community Service Office. They handle the pretrial release for the state cases, but they also have agreed that they will supervise our people who are given a community service mandate. And they are really good to work with. They communicate with us as to whether people are performing as they're supposed to or not. So that's a very satisfying aspect. I think we have a good relationship with the police department. Not such that it looks like we're favoring the police in the cases, but only that we're able to accommodate some of their scheduling needs, some of their technological needs. They are able to accommodate our scheduling needs and some of our technological needs. I mean, just as a brief for instance, when we have the mandatory reviews over the weekend, if someone's arrested and put in custody, the judge has to review within 48 hours whether there's probable cause to hold them. So we have a system now where the sergeant will email the paperwork to whichever judge is on duty, and then it gets emailed back to the sergeant and to records, and of course to the court clerks, and then they have all that information Monday morning, so they can have a file ready. They come in at 7 o'clock, they can start on the file, and we're ready to roll with the video advisements at 9 o'clock. Working with the Sheriff's Department has been good. They've been very accommodating on our video advisements, and they work with other cities too within our judicial district, within the county. They work with Englewood, Sheridan, and Centennial, and Greenwood too. So, it's not something they have to do, but they do it, and they recognize it's part of having people's rights respected.
Hi, Judge. How you doing? Thanks for the information. Appreciate it.
I'm sucking up.
What's that?
Are you sucking up?
Yeah, I'm sucking up, Judge. You never know. You never know.
You got a parking ticket.
Are there any issues? Are there any issues or challenges that we should be made aware of? And also, to add to that, does the city provide the? Pardon me?
Don't read my question.
Does the city provide the adequate equipment that the court needs to do what it needs to do? Video equipment, software, and so on.
We just had an upgrade, for instance, of the video equipment, and so we're learning about it a little bit. It's going to be better than what we had before, which was good before. And part of it is make sure our equipment talks appropriately to the sheriff's equipment on the other end. So we did get the upgrade on that, and technologically, one thing I'd like to do is perhaps upgrade our in-trial video equipment. In other words, instead of necessarily passing documents around to jurors or to witnesses and everyone, getting them projected up on a screen so that everyone can see them at the same time. That's done in most state courts now, and municipal courts, and we've had some discussion about that, but we're taking it a step at a time. We wanted to get the video equipment for dealing with the prisoner advisements done, taken care of first. One other thing I'd like to see, although I don't want to venture into Mr. Kemp's lane too much on this, we do have a victim advocate who works for the police department. You all know Linda Suttle, and she does a wonderful job. But she works for the police department, and her focus is on just immediate service when a crime occurs. And I think her time is limited in terms of being able to be in court and helping us out, helping out the victims. And I think if we had perhaps some more victim services readily available in court, and the model in many places is that it is through the prosecution's office. So I don't want to venture into Mr. Kemp's territory, but it's something that might be very useful. But we are getting the resources we want. We have the personnel we need. particular, if we ask Wendy, she provides it. She's a great collaborator, and Rachel, the court supervisor, is good at identifying things that are needed, and I think the operation works pretty well. I don't think we need any more staff. I think we just, perhaps having someone who can be more of a victim advocate would help.
Discuss how you create an environment for staff and business partners to do their best work.
Well, I think the bottom line is everyone has to be respected as a person and valued as a person, and then valued as an employee or staff person. Within our staff, we try very hard to communicate effectively with each other, to bounce ideas off of each other. If there are disagreements, we make sure that they are professional disagreements and not personal. Sometimes it's a stressful situation, and it can push the limits on any human, but I think we're good at tamping things down pretty well, pretty easily, because we have a good group of people who are respectful of other people. So I think at the very beginning, the hiring process was good because we got good people.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing a lot of the successes and highlights from this year, but now looking forward into next year, what are some of your goals and what you want to accomplish next year?
Well, I want to have the juvenile docket a little bit more defined as to what we're going to do with what types of cases. Like to, one challenge we're actually going to have, although it's really not kind of a goal, but we're getting more and more cases out of Douglas County because of the building on County Line Road. And we do not have a video link with Douglas County Jail. And we've had some discussion about that. And so far, we haven't really moved on that. We have, of course, Trailmark in Jefferson County. And we've had one domestic violence case, I think, every other year out of Trailmark. So in those cases, we've just had to send an officer to Jefferson County Jail to actually physically bring someone. But I think that things are going smoothly. I think the clerks are curious about improving how they do their jobs. I'm curious about improving how I do mine. And I think it's just I want to maintain the atmosphere we have. I think that's a real goal because it's a good atmosphere, and I'm always wanting to hear suggestions on how we can make things better for people. But the staff seems to be pretty happy and pretty respectful of each other, and they are astonishingly respectful of the citizens because there's a lot of stress that comes in. Sometimes, oddly enough, we get more stress from a parking ticket than we do from a domestic violence case. And you've probably all gotten calls.
Yes.
Tickets. And again, I'd like to improve how we assist victims. One thing that has happened by state law that I think is very good is that we are required to inquire whether non-traffic defendants are veterans or currently serving either as reserve or actually active duty. And then if they are, we are by law to refer them to some resources. And I spoke with Don Clemmy, who's the head of community services for the county, and he gave me a list of their resources, and then we've incorporated that into our written advisement for veterans and active military. I also would like to find a way to help out our homeless folks even more. The way the cases are handled, we try to recognize that it isn't the most serious thing in the world. I don't mean to diminish the fact that it's still theft, but when someone goes into King Soopers and they're hungry and they grab a sandwich off the shelf and they sit down in Starbucks and eat the sandwich and then wait to be arrested. Those are tough cases, and they really can break your heart because you see some of the same folks over and over and over. Our staff is very sensitive to them. They try to give whatever assistance they can. We have a stock of the program Rachel started, basically. We have a stock of clothing, socks, clean socks, some toiletries, that if a homeless person is leaving court and they have nowhere to go, at least we can give them something. I know we're not a social welfare agency, but I'm not going to apologize for staff being nice to people. So, but I don't know exactly where I think it's got to be a real community effort to deal with the homeless. The police are doing everything they can, I think. A lot of the homeless are just mentally ill people, too, which is a whole different challenge. Oddly enough, if they were charged with something in state court, they'd have more resources.
So just, you talked about, follow up then, for the veterans, refer them to an organization or some other services, or homeless as well, especially in the case of mental illness that might be associated with that situation. Do you have a resource to refer them to?
Well, in the veterans, we have...
Not the veterans, the mental illness side that might occur or be present.
No, we tell them about various shelters that are available to them, but a lot of them, of course, are downtown Denver, and they are overloaded with humans. A lot of those shelters. So and a lot of the people, they don't want to go anywhere else. They think they're treated reasonably well here. So we do see a lot of the same people. We've got one fella who I think in the last year I've closed 10 cases on him. And it's all for stuff like going into like the vestibule of an office building and trying to warm up in the middle of the night, which is a bit of a problem. That is a very difficult thing. I don't have an answer for that.
The final question is, do you have the resources and tools you need to do your job? I think you kind of covered that, unless you have anything else to add on that.
No, I really think I do. And the most important resource, of course, the people I work with. And they're wonderful.
That's good. It's good to hear this report. After, for many years, it was not the report. So it's very good to hear. And I love the things that you're doing to improve the court and the juvenile. I know you've talked about that now for a couple of years. Last year you came in and let us know that Judge Huffine was working on that. So each year it seems that it's getting more honed into. So I think that's great. I would suggest, and I'm sure Councilmember Fay's head is spinning the same place, we have started a task force group with Sheridan and Inglewood working on the homeless issues. And so Councilmember Fay is our liaison for that. And I think that this is a definite tie-in. We're seeing, what you just raised here is, again, part of what percolates up out of these problems that we don't see that. You see a certain level of homelessness, and so there's a lot of layers to that we don't see. So this group is really working to kind of pull that apart and where are we lacking and what can we do? I mean, just throwing things at this problem is not solving it at any level. So this is an intense group. They'll be meeting for a long time, but the intention is to actually really see some things changing and be able to resource and help that community through some things that we can do. So we'll have you guys tie into that, because I think that sounds like ideal. Council, does anybody else have any other questions? Or Jared?
I think a year or two ago you started scheduling juveniles separate, bulking them together, I think, instead of kind of just in with the other adult work. How's that going?
I think it's going well. I think the one tweak we had to make, and we've made it now, is that we were compressing it all into one Thursday morning, twice a month. And that was frustrating the parents because of necessity, that means people are sitting around a lot. So by going to a formal structure of all day on Thursday and then spacing them out as best we can, I think that helps a lot. I think it makes the court experience a little bit more meaningful for the juveniles too.
Any other questions? I have one quick question. You had indicated that you didn't see a need for an increase in staff, but you have commented on a victim's advocate. Is there someone on staff that could do that? Are you looking for someone who can, how do you see that?
I think actually it might be a discussion for me to have with Mr. Kemp because there may be some separation of power issues there.
Okay.
And
we certainly will have that discussion. And one other thing that probably is going to impact the court on the legislature this year is there's a big discussion on bail reform and eliminating bail and eliminating also significant categories of fines. So that is something I'm sure again the judge can talk about, but that is likely going to be a major legislative impact that we will see this year.
bail reform is going to be a huge issue. It's part of generally criminal justice reform in this legislature, but I think bail reform is going to be like the centerpiece.
Well, we definitely will stay on top of the legislative actions particularly through CML. I know that they've got February, we've got a legislative workshop with them. And I know you stay tied in pretty well. So there's stuff going on down at the state capitol that we need to get activated over. So we'll do that. Because I think that is more and more important for municipalities as we're dealing with these unfunded mandates and these other things that come down. And so we've got a pretty substantial group of people that help fight those. We don't always win, but we win more than we lose. So we'll stay on top of that for certain. And Steve keeps us very well informed. So
The Municipal Judges Association, I'm on the board of that, has just formed a relationship with a lobbyist also.
good.
To more particularly, not to get lost in the whole group of CML issues. Although the CML lobbyist, Megan Dollar, has been very effective for us.
Yeah.
But I think we can help her out by having some of that separated out. Just let me briefly say one unfunded mandate thing that we just found out about yesterday is that there's a bill been introduced in the legislature to have a mandatory reminder program for defendants in cases, so that there'll have to be someone tasked with reminding all defendants to come to court on non-traffic cases. So far, it hasn't included municipal courts, but as you all know about the legislative process, I need not say more, I guess. But that would cost a lot of money.
And that's in this year's session. Okay.
Just was introduced
So
or drafted.
does that include a way that you're going to do it to make sure that they receive the reminder? Or just you send a letter and who knows if they get it?
Well, the bill actually says if the person has a smartphone or a cell phone, I guess they're to be texted by someone at the court. And they're to get 2 reminders, is the way it was written for initially.
And
They sit down there and they're brilliant to come up with these
so
ideas.
the people that don't have a smartphone don't
Then they'll get
a
phone calls, and then if they don't have a phone, I'm not sure what the prospects are for that.
Okay.
Thank you all very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you for the honor of serving you.
Thanks,
All of
Judge.
you.
Thank you for all. Thank you for all you do. Appreciate it.
All rise.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next item. And this is a presentation on a recent survey on the commercial modernism in the Great West Littleton Boulevard corridor. This was a study that we had funded with the grant, and I think that we supported that grant over a year ago. So we have a presentation, and then I think we've got a little bit of conversation. And obviously some setup.
Let's just pause for a second.
Pause.
Sorry.
Then you're going to start.
So this will be led by Jocelyn Mills, Community Development Director. Jocelyn?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Council. I'm happy to introduce you this evening to our consultants that we worked on with this project, Michael Paglia and Diane Ray Tomaso. I just wanted to quickly note a couple items about the survey itself. We are very excited about it. We do feel it'll be a really good resource for both property owners along Littleton Boulevard, as well as the timing couldn't be more perfect in that it really will be a good resource also as we take on the comprehensive plan update. So that is really some great opportunities of how we're going to use this next. And then the other piece that I wanted to note is that we are working on an outreach plan to property owners of the final results. And we have formed a committee, and there's a couple members from Historic Preservation Board as well as Historic Littleton. And so they're going to be working with staff over the next couple of months to get that outreach to the community. So with that.
Where's Tyler?
Yeah,
He'll be magically appearing here momentarily.
So one of the things we want to show,
We'll magically walk through the door.
That's the video.
one thing while we're waiting, this video, would like to recognize Tyler because he really did help facilitate the creation of the video, he and Michael. So that was awesome, and I think you'll really enjoy it.
No, Tyler. Yes, Tyler did all the technical stuff on this video.
It's right here. You just have to hit play here. It was all set up for you, Randy. Good job, Tyler. T-ball. The ball's just sitting right there.
Nice try, Randy. Nice try.
All right, so we're going to show the video first, and then we'll do a short presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, the video is based on the study, although it was an ancillary piece that came after. But we want to show it to you to kind of hook you on the topic. And then we'll talk about this. You're already hooked?
I'm already hooked. So
Thank God. And then we're going to talk about very briefly how we did the study.
Do we want to lower
Can we
the
get
lights?
the lights down?
Wow.
Randy.
Randy will start taking over the buttons now.
Give it a shot, Randy.
Yeah, Tyler should be down here.
He'll be down here where I can't get him back on.
There we go. Okay, I'd leave it at that. Charlie Brown music, isn't it?
In the 1950s, Littleton was a typical small town with an economy based in farming and small manufacturing. Much of what is today West Littleton Boulevard was populated by houses on Ridge Road downtown, and further east farms, one of which still exists. But Littleton is close to Denver and would soon be transitioning into one of the Mile High City's principal suburbs. Littleton was more than a bedroom community, however, becoming a center for the defense and aerospace industries. This association with high-tech manufacturing, combined with the proximity of Denver, explains how a humble town like Littleton would witness the appearance of vanguard modernist buildings by significant architects. Let's look at some of the best as we travel from South Broadway to Old Downtown. The distinctive and idiosyncratic Smedley Dental Clinic is an early and important design by Colorado's foremost disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright, Victor Cornwell, who would later create the Denver Botanic Gardens, among other landmarks. Especially notable is that old-growth cedar paneling that miraculously has never been painted. When it was completed in the 1950s, the Smedley Dental Clinic was featured in the National Architectural Press. Raymond Heil's expressionist style Nichols Hill Chapel piece strikes a balance between its theatrical forms and the sense that it is a sacred space befitting its purpose as a mortuary. There are luxurious materials, including stone walls and art glass windows. Another notable attribute of Nichols Hill Chapel piece is its park-like setting in a landscape plan that's as modernist as the building itself. Another example of expressionism, but one that is more profane than sacred, is Rich's charcoal curtains. Though the designer is unknown, the building is clearly the work of an architect, since it comprises a complex set of sophisticated detail, like the wraparound glass curtain wall and the covered drive-through. This car-friendly feature is ubiquitous today, but it was a fairly new idea when Rich's was built, with the post-war period marked by soaring rates of automobile ownership. The Arapahoe County Bank was designed by a pioneer of Colorado's modern architecture, Earl Chester Morris. The building has a wonderful assortment of interesting volumes and other attributes. In particular, those two zigzagging roof lines, side by side across the facade. Morris typically designed much larger buildings than this small bank, but he had a special relationship with Littleton, where he lived and where he is buried. Surely the Littleton Savings and Loan by Joseph and Louise Marlowe is among the most artistically distinguished of the mid-century modernist buildings in Old Littleton. The sculptural sunscreen across the second floor is extraordinary. It was designed by Robert Cross, who would soon become internationally famous. The bank is an advanced design for its date, with the Marlowes being among Colorado's most avant-garde architects of the period. Resembling an office building, Temple Fuel's Mountain States Telephone and Telegraph is actually a switching station. Constructed of brick, accented by polished and rough-finished aggregate, the grand entrance has a monumental quality. Buell, the head of the state's premier 20th century architectural firm, which earlier designed the Paramount Theater and later the State Services Building, obviously wanted Mountain States to be dignified enough to fit into its high-profile location. A handsome pavilion set at a perpendicular to the street, the Mr. State is the work of a prominent Denver architect called Stewart. The cantilever canopies, with their inverted pyramidal shapes, and the triangular detailing of the window walls give this small building a big presence. In this period, eye-catching restaurants were seen as a way to magically turn motorists zooming by in their cars into diners seated inside, and it worked. The Martin Miller Law Offices has an appropriately dignified appearance, in line with its function. Miller, Littleton's most prominent attorney, hired Eugene Sternberg, Littleton's most prominent architect, to carry out the job. The building anticipates Sternberg's most important Littleton commission, Arapahoe Community College, which is just a couple of years newer. In the Miller building, Sternberg, working in a brutalist style, converted the prose of cast concrete into the poetry of elegantly imagined forms and details. The Title Guarantee Company by Joseph and Louise Marlowe sports impossibly thin planar walls. The glass block wall and the glass curtain entry set deep within the covered porch are strictly minimalist. But moderating the severity, not unlike the sunscreen's role at the Marlowe's Littleton Savings and Loan, is the mosaic by Belgian artist René Hébert. Guarantee Trust is an extremely refined building that's been smartly inserted into the hill on which it's built. Eugene Sternberg's courthouse building is more flamboyant than his later Miller building. For the courthouse building, constructed to house Sternberg's own office, he decided to show off his talent for composition. To do that, he assembled a vocabulary of details, most emphatically complex masonry that includes different bricks set in different lines, as well as the constructivist patterns of the windows. Like the Guaranteed Trust directly across the boulevard, the courthouse building takes advantage of its hilly site. The Circle Savings and Loan, with its eccentric formal qualities, is one of just a handful of modernist buildings in old downtown Littleton. Designed by Laramie and Butts, it sits diagonally at the corner and features curvilinear and rectilinear elements. One of its distinctive details is the sunken garden that reveals a submerged lower level. With its elaborate contours, express piers, and curves, Circle is a masterpiece of the bricklayer's art. Another monument to bricklaying is the Littleton National Bank by Parker Rinker Seacat, one of the most ambitious mid-century modern buildings in Old Littleton. With its heavily hooded windows and deeply recessed ground floor, Littleton National Bank exemplifies brutalism. The tower, with its vertical shape, creates a contrast to the horizontal massing of the building itself. Built in the late 1970s, the bank is the end of the line for post-war modernism in Old Littleton. It's astounding that there are so many significant modernist buildings so close together by so many different important architects as there are in Old Littleton. A number of these architects, including Morris, the Marlows, and the Sternberg, were not only designers of some of the city's most outstanding buildings, but they were also deeply involved in the civic life of Littleton, in particular its city planning. These finely conceived and well-built landmarks and a dozen more represent to Littleton and to Colorado an extremely valuable historic and architectural resource.
Should we just go right into the study? Okay.
Well done.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, no.
So here we're just going to do a brief PowerPoint presentation, largely just to introduce you to the document itself, which you actually have in your packet. Basically just to point out that this document was created, I think you just deleted my...
Oh, just
Somebody sit him down.
send it out remedial. That's what they can. Wasn't part of my.
Sit down.
And really, more than anything, this is just to illustrate the fact that we wanted very much in documenting the survey to create a report that could automatically be used to promote the survey. So as you'll see, all the spreads that appear in here are things that can be easily printed out and used as storyboards for different events and public outreach programs. This is the introduction spread, and you can see down at the bottom the scope of the survey.
Yeah, basically the boundaries of the survey, with the red stripe being West Littleton Boulevard. Then there's the downtown of Main Street, which, you know, we saw Littleton Boulevard historically as an extension of Main Street. And then that green area is the corridor where the different commercial buildings would be built a block or two either side of Littleton Boulevard. And by the way, we looked at every commercial building that was constructed between 1950 and 1980 in this area, which amounted to 77 buildings. Hey, you want to talk about the tiering?
One of the things that we did, often these surveys simply tell you which buildings are National Register eligible, which ones are eligible for state landmarks, local landmarks. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to give a more complete idea in terms of planning use. So we created 4 tiers. The first tier, which represented 29% or 22 of the surveyed buildings, were the finest buildings of their type. The second tier, 20 or 26% of the surveyed buildings, are noteworthy buildings. And then third tier, 16 or 21%. These largely share in the social and general architectural history of the period, but aren't, especially distinguished in terms of architecture. And then the fourth tier, which is 19 or 25% of the survey buildings, many of which have been compromised, were undistinguished originally, and of course alteration played a role as well. The third and fourth tier being those buildings which were most heavily altered. And we created just this to show basically 3 buildings of about the same volume, the same scale, simple one-story buildings, and how each one of those are represented in the tiers.
And with a description below, this is kind of a setup to the study, a description below of how you can interpret these different tiers in an objective way. So it's not just, oh, this is our favorite and this is our least favorite, but actually putting together, objective criteria by which you could evaluate the 4 tiers of the buildings.
Sorry, this thing's getting ahead of me. Then for each of the tiers, there's an introductory spread that gives a little bit more information, more details on the historical significance, the architectural significance, the integrity or the condition of the buildings, and then preservation or district recommendations. Of course, the first tier buildings merit the highest level of consideration for preservation. And then the buildings are listed in address order, whether they're falling along West Littleton Boulevard itself, within the larger corridor, which are the green numbers, or part of the whole downtown historic district there in blue. So there's a spread like this for each of the 4 tiers. This is a sample of a tier 1 spread that was created with the intention of, say, there's a walking tour, there's an exhibit about this particular building, that we took images that we found, historic images that would relate the story, the social history, the architectural history of the building. This is the Fran Cam Realty and Insurance Building at 1150 West Littleton Boulevard, which was actually designed and built by French immigrants after World War II.
And the same architect, Rene Chausenot, was the developer of Normandy Estates and designed many of the modernist houses in Normandy Estates. And let me just add, the 12 buildings we saw in the video are each presented the same way in the study, where we have historic images and then a discussion of the building and the other top tier buildings, the other first tier buildings.
Now this is an example when we go down to the second tier, where the first tier buildings have a whole entire spread, 2-page spread. The second tier buildings each get a full page.
As a way for readers, like in the community, citizens, or members of the council, whatever, the study graphically illustrates the tiering so that the first tier is 2 pages, the second tier they're 1 page each, because we're looking at a spread page here. And then you can go to the third tier. So you can literally flip through it and get the evaluation that we've put in there. We were really thinking of making this reader-friendly, citizen-friendly,
Because so often, even though we've worked in preservation, each of us 30 years, some preservation reports are so deadly that, you could just fall asleep after 2 pages. So we wanted this to really pop and be fun. And
To read more like a magazine
right.
than a preservation report. Then going down to the 3rd tier and the 4th tier, we're showing 4 per spread.
Things like gas stations, the IHOP, things like that.
And then we made some survey recommendations, which are more detailed on pages 144 through 47 of the survey document. Basically to expand the Main Street Historic District to include the modern buildings in the downtown area that merit the same level of preservation as the older buildings. We offer 3 different alternatives for creating a historic district along West Littleton Boulevard where the buildings are not necessarily going to be contiguous for the most part.
Called an overlay district.
Yeah. Considering a National Register multi-property edition document, which we won't go into the details, but this can help facilitate owners getting more quickly securing federal and state tax credits for their building.
Even grants, like from the Colorado Historic Fund and other funds for grants.
And then we also recommend a broad program of public outreach, which is, Andrea will talk about a little bit, that's already taking place in the community with preservation organizations in the city working cooperatively, encouraging property owners to preserve historic building landscapes and recommendations on how some landscaping may help reduce the visual predominance of parking lots, which...
Finish your thought. I was going to say the parking lots, with this period, parking lots were seen as a plus. This is a time when people are first having cars and, this great growth of cars. In the 30s, people first had cars, but the general selling of cars after World War II. So to have a parking lot, they didn't look ugly the way they looked to us. They looked like the future. They looked like, modern to have this parking lot. But now they could be screened by landscaping. They could be cut up by landscaping. And as we see in, say, the contemporary shopping centers, where there'll be trees amongst the parking lot, that kind of thing. Sorry, go ahead.
And then there's a final recommendation regarding just doing more extensive survey of modernism throughout the city of Littleton. There's a great deal more material here, really in keeping with the same quality that we've identified here, and we recommend that as a worthwhile pursuit.
And one of the things that's special about Littleton is, in terms of the suburbs in Metro Denver, is both this, kind of jewel box historic downtown, and then this context of first-tier modernist buildings, which for the most part are fairly small, and therefore it makes it easier to conceive of adaptive reuse than, say, if there were big factories or something. So it's very unusual, and I think you all know this, that the only other place I can think of the suburbs would be Arvada, where you have this old downtown and these post-war buildings of a high quality adjacent to one another.
And in working with the preservation community here in town, they're recognizing this as a new opportunity to extend the same interest in building reuse that's taken place downtown, preservation, new development, and to extend that to the greater West Littleton Boulevard corridor as well.
And also, mid-century modern is very hot, and so you get magazines are talking about it. So there could be, we've talked about, there could be a car show, for example, that would have a plug-in to the mid-century modern. You already have that big vintage car dealer there, and his building was one of the buildings we identified as, I believe, a second-tier building. That was a Furr's grocery store. Yeah. Any questions?
That was a what again?
Furr's Grocery Store. Do you remember Furr's Cafeteria? They had a grocery store chain, and that was the Furr's Grocery Store. Yeah.
I don't remember.
They were out of Texas.
What year was that?
How old are you? Because I remember going to Furr's in Colorado Springs for my mom to get groceries, so it was before your time. I would say, I recall it in the 60s, early 70s.
They had green stamps.
I bet they did, yeah.
Wrong cigarettes.
Council, any
Go back to the
questions or comments? We are on a time frame here, so we need to keep moving.
So what's next?
Yeah.
We have the study. We now can give direction to neighbors, developers, whoever. Do we try to preserve just tiers 1 and 2? 3 and 4 didn't do much for me architecturally.
Obviously, we think tier 1 is the most valuable asset. Some of the tier 2s are very nice too. I would agree with you that, the 3 and 4s are questionable. There are some of the 3 and 4s that were badly remodeled. We see, like, say, in Lodo, where they bring a building back and they remove the later remodeling. Some of that could elevate some of the 3s anyway, in terms of their design.
Identifying those tiers 3 and 4 are ways that owners can make decisions regarding those. If they want to make the changes that would allow them to be more original and thus incorporated into a district, they could. If not.
It was also our charge to look at every building from that specific period, but like you, I think the top tier buildings, if you're going to go to the map for something, and also I think they define the character of the street. So if you were going to develop design guidelines for new buildings, it might be good to have them be compatible with this existing set of buildings.
And I would say the next steps that we're working on is we're going to do some outreach to the property owners and community about these resources. And then the other thing, the timing really is good in that this whole survey can become part of the comprehensive plan and furthering the conversation through those discussions as well. So.
I think the last 2 pages of the handout has an outline by the city of how the public outreach project is going forward. Karina?
Some of the recommendations, so how do we implement some of those recommendations, or what's the process to implement some of those recommendations?
So from the comprehensive plan conversation, I think that's where we have the opportunity to take the document, the recommendations, and really vet it through the comprehensive plan process itself and some of the outcomes, based on getting community input on where we want to move the whole topic, or how to move it forward.
And the follow-up to that, because that's going to be, we're in the process of that, anything at risk now, as far as you're aware, especially in the tier 1 or tier 2?
From redevelopment, is that what you're saying? Not necessarily.
SCAC? The Van Scack building at Main and
That's
Prince.
already, it's occupied. I mean, as far as along Littleton Boulevard, we don't see any immediate threats there. I mean, obviously, that's always an option. We're hoping with an outreach campaign to the property owners that will start more immediately, that we'll get some awareness that way and some interest, because there are opportunities for grant money and tax credits if you bring your property into a local district or a state district.
What about downtown? You specified Littleton Boulevard, but what about downtown? Because you had several identified as tier 1.
Right, yes.
So downtown's at risk, or it's not at risk either?
I guess everything's always at risk, as far as applications or things that the city knows of right now. Not necessarily. We did have an application for the Van Scott building is actually where the Jackass Hill Brewery is. That is already in the local district. So if they were to make additional changes, they did get approval from the historic board to add an entrance into the side of that building, but that is already in Littleton's historic district, so that would have to comply with all of those regulations should they want to do anything else.
So the taco house is safe.
That taco house is really good, man. I say look at it, you know. I think it is. I think one of the taco house notwithstanding, because it's a little run down, but one of the indications of how valued these buildings are is how many of them are in beautiful condition, that they've been maintained, you know, and are being maintained by their current owners.
So I mean, looking at the vision document that we approved last year, you know, the first line of what we strive for in our vision statement is maintain the integrity of its established neighborhoods and historic areas. And this is a historic area. And I think that's Littleton brings to the whole metro region is this mid-century modern architecture that, like you said, is not really found anywhere else except for maybe Arvada. I mean, we have residential neighborhoods, we got Arapahoe Hills, we got Aberdeen Village. This kind of ties it together. And historic districts can be a driver for economic vitality, along with mid-century modern architecture by itself. You know, I spent last week in Palm Springs, and just driving around looking at that. I mean, you know, I think Littleton has something here that we can, you know, trying to say what can Littleton be. You know, are we an arts district? Are we this district? I mean, we could be a architecture district that, you know, people from around the country and around the world come and see these buildings that are there. I'm all for trying to preserve and maintain these as much as we possibly can.
And you're totally right in terms of the quality too, because, you know, those names, I know none of you guys are really dedicated to 20th century Colorado architects, but those are some of the biggest names in the state doing little buildings here, you know, and doing big buildings downtown. I mean, it's just amazing, really.
I mean, and in the 60s, those were big buildings out, you know, outskirts.
Right, for the outskirts,
they stood alone by themselves and were,
right.
Yeah, so I have a question. College, for example, which is not this, right, but it's a great building.
Yes.
Leaky. And I'm not sure if they ever still have the roof fixed. I mean, it dipped down on me quite a few times. But some of these buildings, I'm assuming, particularly the flat tops, may have issues like that. They have old glass that's leaking heat and letting heat in when we don't want it in. So to what extent can they be made in any way more efficient without compromising their historic character or designation if we do that?
That could be done. I don't think it's really urgent on any of these buildings. Maybe I'm wrong. And remember, the greenest building is the building that's already there. Because there's nothing less green than tearing down a building and building a new one.
But if you're sitting next to a window and you're freezing your butt off, it's not good for working. So
These are issues that are common to all older buildings, whether they're modern in style or not. And, you know, working with a preservation architect who can specify appropriate windows that can, and heating and air conditioning systems that can meet usability goals while maintaining the architectural qualities of a building. That's something that takes place every day.
in one sense, people who actually want to buy, use, whatever, they don't want to be spending half of their money, their income, you know.
In residential architecture, mid-century modern is ridiculously hot. So you're paying, you know, twice the square footage as you would a traditional building. I mean, this has just happened. You know, you were in Palm Springs, you know, it just happened. I'll just say I know you're in a hurry, one brief funny thing, and I hope you'll take it in the spirit in which it's delivered. But the head of Johnson & Johnson commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to design a house. And he called furious on Thanksgiving Day and said, "The roof is leaking on my turkey." And Frank Lloyd Wright said, "Move the turkey."
Well, I mean, I do support this. I think
right, no, I
just was curious.
Right. No, they're addressing these things in some of the buildings downtown where they're putting whole new glass curtain walls on some of these office buildings, you know.
Well, thank you very much. I think this is an eye-opener for many, for myself. I mean, you drive around, you see all these buildings, you kind of think they look cool, but now they're even cooler. And I like that we have a historic preservation philosophy in Littleton. We always have, but I don't know that we've moved it into another generation yet. So this is kind of a nice nudge for us to say, you know, that mid-century modern, every day that goes by, it continues to get older and older too, and more interesting. So just another opportunity for us to continue to support the projects and enlarge in our vision on historic preservation. This is really, really great. I would like to see wide distribution of your study, because I think it's new information for a lot of people, and definitely improves kind of that relationship you have with your community. So thank you very much.
Well, we had a great time, and thanks for having us and hearing us out. And
absolutely, it was a pleasure. Nice work. Appreciate it.
Nice job.
Okay, so we'll let the room clear, and then we'll return back in. Start up at 7:45. the agenda is the Next Generation Advisory.
I don't know if I want him to.
Strike three, we'll see if it's.
Randy. So, this is going to be presented, we're going to start off with Mark presenting on this, and then Councilmember Schlechter. Mark?
Thank you, Mayor. So Randy, if you don't mind, would you just hit to the next slide here? I just want to do a very brief introduction, and then Councilmember Schlachter is going to talk about some of the conversations he's had with some of you as council members, and certainly some outside people here to respond to a couple of meetings we've had. So as background, we've had 2 study sessions, the first one back in March, the second one here in June. The June meeting, there was direction here from the council, provided some feedback about how they're looking for a little bit more detail on plan and process. And so as a result of that, Councilmember Schlachter, largely to his credit, he's been kind of working on this issue here. And he's worked with staff, and in your packet here for this week, we've included several documents to kind of address some of your issues here. And so the ask here specifically this evening here is to have council direct us whether or not to proceed with this advisory committee, yes or no. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Schlachter and Randy Young, our handicapped technology expert.
Here, present.
Sorry, Randy, just.
Not really.
It's true.
So we talked with Mark and Sam about bringing this back, especially after our discussion with the Envision Littleton process, where we saw that this demographic was largely underrepresented in the feedback that we got. And so we wanted to tweak a few of the things, some of the comments that council made the previous time we talked about it, and reframe what the purpose is for council, as this is a way for council to get feedback information from a group of citizens that we are seeking and haven't necessarily been receiving as much as we wanted to. And so we updated the mission. It reads, to support council's vision statement with thoughtful, considerate, insightful recommendations, suggestions, and feedback on matters of city policy that directly impact the attraction and retention of young residents and employees. And so this is to get, for us to have the information to create policy that we can look for in the future to say, how are we going to attract and keep a younger demographic in here? What things are people under the age of 35 looking for in a community that we may not be thinking about? And so I think it's important to get this, bridge this communication gap that we seem to have, that is illustrated in the Envision Littleton process, where we weren't getting that feedback right there. And so we've updated some of the topics to better match the municipal activities, looking specifically at things we're doing. There was an action plan that is listed that will be included in the correspondence that is very specific, saying this is what they're going to do and when, kind of really tie it into the consultants with Kennedy Keys to really get this as part of the comprehensive plan. We tweaked a little bit with the inclusion for the schools. We want LPS, or the proposals to have Littleton Public Schools and Arapahoe Community College, them do the vetting of who they want to represent their constituency, and then recommend it to the council to put them on the board. I think it was in there before, but this expectation that these members are getting more involved to see what's going on with council, and have them watch council meetings and say, this is what we're talking about. How can they respond to issues and policy questions that we may have that we're not getting that back? And so that's what the updates in the bylaws are. And then there will be a timeline that's a little more, it's still pretty loose, but better defined of what they're going to accomplish and when. And I think a lot of it will be driven by issues that we raise throughout the year, and issues that maybe that we don't think of that this group will present and suggest to us as feedback. And it, you can see it has a council review by December 2020. So the idea is let this have a 2-year period to, let's evaluate it, see if it's working. If it's not working in 2 years, we can say, well, we tried it, and so much with that. But this at least gives us a chance to get input for us so we can make better policy moving forward.
I like the 2-year also because it gives it enough time, not too much, and then it also gives you time to tweak it along, so that if you see something at 6 months, you can tweak it and then still see the result of that.
And I think that first year is pretty well set with working with consultants and Jocelyn with the comprehensive plan to make sure issues that we may not be thinking about or haven't gotten feedback from the community are brought to light and made part of that, or at least brought to us to see if we should include that into the comprehensive plan forward. Do you have any questions?
Carol?
Is the way that this group interfaces with staff without additional staff time by having to go through the Envision group?
Can you?
One of our concerns, though, when we heard this before in study session, was how was staff going to say, how are we going to have time for staff to support one more thing to do when they already said they were too busy? And then I got the flavor from this that there was no intention to use staff time. Yet there are deliverables. So from what you were saying about it, how do they do that? How does this group do their deliverable without using staff time? Or am I wrong?
I think they'll be meeting, it won't necessarily be taking up staff time. I think they'll be a little bit upfront to get them going, especially with the consultant. Mark will probably fill in better on this, on how that will work. But it's mainly they'll be doing their own driving. It's not going to have any minutes being done by staff. It's going to be mostly, here's the direction. This is what's going on with the comprehensive plan.
Right.
How do you, and then let them kind of take the wheel.
Is the consultant time already allocated?
I think it is, right?
That already exists? They're going to tap into something that exists, or is this additional?
The short answer is yes.
Yes, but not all the time.
Shorter.
So I think that, this lags a little bit behind the Southern Review Committee that we had put in place here to kind of help manage the overall comprehensive planning process. But the intent is to, with really about a month behind, try to engage them as quickly as we can. So yes, the consultant has a schedule already built in, so we can take advantage of that. I would agree with Councilmember Schlachter that, there'll probably be a little bit of staff time up front, probably from Sam LaFox to kind of help set up the meeting originally. Then I think as they get a few meetings under their belt, the intent is that we turn it over to them. They provide their own minutes. They share that with the city clerk. We post that on a web page. So I think I would anticipate here that certainly over this period of time that our staff interaction is probably going to be minimal. And I think that's part of the evaluation process. Certainly I am sensitive to staff time, so I'd be sharing kind of the output of what I see on our side.
I wouldn't see it any more involved than with the new transportation committee, with staff time being involved there. I mean, it's all of our boards and commissions are to get feedback, to council, kind of vet something first. And I think this is an important demographic that we haven't been getting information from. It's a way for us to do that.
I just would also add, we did, if you remember, we kind of patterned this off of an example that either Aspen or Pitkin County had kind of put in place. And so some of our recommendations and kind of insight really is largely just watching them and the information they shared with us. And so, yes, the intent was to have that committee, their advisory committee, kind of drive it themselves. And so their staff time was pretty minimal as well. So that's what we're anticipating here. I'm sure that, depending on the topic, we'll learn a few things about all that, but we're trying to look to minimize staff time.
And there won't be all that many meetings. It's not going to be like weekly or even necessarily monthly. I think in the bylaws it was at least quarterly. If there's something that they need to meet more regularly on, a topic that they want to get some information about the comprehensive plan, that they can meet more regularly. But it's not going to be all that.
Second concern left over from the study session we had on this topic before is it permissible, and this is probably a question for the attorney, to stipulate specific ages for a particular function? Is that legal?
Yes, I think that the council could certainly stipulate for either particular functions or particular types of members.
So I probably objected everybody didn't necessarily watch that meeting.
I think you
I
agreed.
just wants to articulate my thoughts. A 34-year-old is technically old enough to be the parent of a 17-year-old. I think there's a huge difference in age. That's just one thing. But the other is, I would like to see us reaching out to the group larger in many ways than to have, to the demographic, than to have a committee so small giving us that input. I think engaging more people, saying we want to hear from you, and when you hear from us, do you mind letting us know your age so we have some sense of whatever? But a 17-year-old might still be in high school or might actually have graduated early. A 34-year-old could. My cousin's grandmother is 34. And she got married very young, not it was all legal, whatever, but she had a child very young, and then that child had a child very young. And so I don't, we're going to just go on age, or, what are we doing? But I think the more we can try to reach out and say, let's go to, and I think I suggested this before, let's go and talk to the high school group. Let's more than one high school group, maybe in social studies, maybe in an English class, where they engage in issues or whatever, and maybe in a student government. But I think there are better ways to try to get much more rigorous, dynamic, broad input.
I respond to say, I agree that, there's a lot more we can do, and I think this is just one possible tactic to go out and get more information for us, and that's kind of what I see this as.
Sorry. Okay, so this is a question for Mark. I know when Keith was here a few weeks ago, we talked about probably considering adding more boards, and this being one of them, or sort of board. Transportation is one we're doing, and then there's others that he was suggesting that we may want to consider. So at what point do we need more staff when we're adding all these boards?
Well, with all due respect to our public works director, I don't know if I necessarily agree we need to add a lot more boards. I think this is kind of a conversation that we would have with council over time. And I think the comp plan is quite honestly one of the better opportunities for you guys to identify what clearly are the policy direction you want to go. From that, perhaps other boards and commissions may come out of that, but I think that's a very deliberate conversation that we would have over perhaps years. But the first step really is the comp plan. So as of today, personally, I don't see us adding any more boards or commissions.
Okay, you answered the
as of
question
today.
Yeah, that's good. So the other part too, then, and I'm not opposed to this. I think it's been tweaked, and I like it. I think like Peggy though. I think up to 34 still. I think you did send a comment, or you sent a comment, something about why that age group versus a smaller, younger group. And I'm still not sold on the 34-year-olds because we have plenty of 34-year-olds on our boards and commissions, I think, at the city council, or thereabouts. But I'm trying to think, what are we trying to fix here? Because when I go downtown Littleton, and I go down there a lot, there is a lot of young people down there. And there's 20s, there's 30s, there's kids, young little baby kids. I'm trying to think, what is it we're really trying to fix? Because if it appears to be working, whatever is working, I'm just a little... I don't know what we're trying to fix by doing this, because if we're looking for more input, just go down to Main Street any weekend, man. It's packed with people.
I think we're looking for a more formalized communication system for that input.
And what's preventing that now? I mean, we have so many ways to communicate.
Mark, then Karina, and then Pat.
If I may, maybe kind of respond to the issue. I think it's a very common practice of cities across the country, based on what I've seen, where councils will look for trying to engage this specific age group. I think the Envision Littleton, if if you remember the data that we presented to the council, that demographic was weak compared to all the other input we got from the other groups here in the city. And that is not just unique to Littleton, that's just a problem nationwide. So it is this demographic that is a little difficult to get them to engage. And so I think this is an attempt to try to do something a little bit different, at least for this city. And I think there are issues here that we're going to see here. I think the comp plan conversation council had here back this summer is probably an excellent example where I believe that this age group, if you can get them engaged, is going to have a lot to say. Not just the comp plan, but how it interacts with the transportation piece of this. And I'm just thinking of my 3 girls who are, roughly in the mid-30s now, and they just think differently about transportation than their father does. And so it is really an interesting conversation. One who is now 38 years old just bought their first car 2 years ago. So they just think differently about transportation. And so I think this is, I'm not trying to build a case one way or the other here. It's more about, I think this age demographic is unique.
And I think that's why communities around the country are doing this. They're saying, hey, we need to get this.
What's the hottest thing in chocolate ice cream? Yeah,
I don't think we should do it because it's hot. I think it's because it's important to get this information. If we're going to be setting policy that are going to be changing the face of Littleton for the next 20 years, what does that look like in 20 years for the people that are then in charge of the city?
I like the idea too that it has the sunset in there too. That gives us an opportunity to address it again in 2 years.
Karina.
I see what we're doing here as a reason. It's essentially a symptom of our communication and outreach strategy that we are not capturing this voice in a way that we feel is significant enough. And perhaps it will happen over time as we are getting more of this generation coming back into the city and engaging in the city. So for me, if this is part of a bigger communication and outreach strategy to truly include more people from our community, not just this age group, then I can get more comfortable about this. What I do like about this is the this idea of ambassadors for Envision Littleton. So that is kind of a tactic to help them engage. I don't feel comfortable calling this a board or an advisory board of any in that capacity, because when I look at an advisory board, that's very staff intensive. It takes on a whole different, I think, structure. So from my perspective, I would like us to look at our communication and outreach strategy, and if Kelly comes back to us and says this is a way, this is a tactic within that strategy, I could feel more comfortable about that, because then to me it's more of it's not about a structured board.
Mayor, for me, I think the short answer is yes, this is part of a larger strategy about how we engage all demographics within our city. I think I am confident at the retreat we're going to be talking about this kind of next phase for us and how we engage and communicate with our citizens. And I think the Envision Littleton is an interesting example about how we did things differently. And this is really new for us. And I think a lot of credit goes to the staff who tried a process here that was new. The fact that we got, I don't remember the numbers here, over a couple thousand people engaged on this is quite remarkable, really. And so I think there is a recognition on the part of staff and council too, I certainly have talked to you about it, that it's time for us to think differently about how we strategize on communication and engagement.
I think this is a very proactive approach. We've been talking about being more proactive rather than reactive to issues.
Just for a little history, Carl and Tom approached both myself and Kyle to get this conversation going. And I was just really impressed with those two guys who wanted to take this initiative on, and they really felt like they wanted to be heard. So I just wanted to, sort of bring you up to speed as to why this is where it's at today. the demographics, I think, are exactly what everybody said. You know, that 17 to 34 is really lacking. And again, those are going to be the people that are here 20 years down the road, and the decisions or the recommendations they give to council, you know, next year or so are going to be the ones that are affecting their families and you know, making their quality of life that much better. So again, I'm all in favor of this. I don't see really any downside. Maybe a little bit of staff cost, but for what I think we'll get out of it, and again, sunsets in 2 years, I think it's a good opportunity for us to let those people be heard.
Piggybacking on what Karina was saying about the advisory board, it makes me uncomfortable that, in a sense, we're taking a segment of the population who we haven't heard from much and elevating them to advisory, where the others were participants in surveys and had input, and now we have a select age group that is promoted to advisory. Advisory, to me, has a sense that we are obligated to listen to them and perform as they suggest. We don't have to, but we're strongly encouraged to do that. I don't like that kind of assumption that they will be giving us information that is useful. I like the assumption that they will be giving us information that's on a par with the other information we've gotten, but I don't like it elevated.
Karina, your thought was more of a, elaborate a little bit on what you said again. Could you?
On which?
Yeah, you were talking about instead of being advisory, more of, you know, getting with Kelly and talking about, you know, how do we.
So I see, you know, the word ambassador really resonates for me because that is how what we're trying to accomplish is an engagement level at that, I guess, age group or demographic that we see maybe in some other demographics. And so some of that is just about knowing how to speak that language, how to, you know, where should we be, where are they? And that's why an ambassador truly does play that role, which is a different definition than advisory, as Carol also alluded to here. So to me, it's about, you almost want to call it the next generation ambassador committee. And that's where it also, to me, fits in very nicely with the Envision subcommittee that was formed, because that's part of the role. More strongly, the role is as an ambassador. So I would feel more comfortable as this being an ambassador group to help increase engagement than it necessarily is for the goal of advising. The engagement alone becomes a greater voice.
Yeah. So your thought is looking to see how do we use them to say how do we get more input from that group instead of giving advisory on how to do things in the city type thing. If that's what is that?
I'd be more comfortable on that front.
I completely am not comfortable with that. I think that's a completely different group. It's a completely different function. It's a completely different effort. I don't think it's this at all. I think that if we want to change the name from Next Generation Advisory Committee to something that doesn't say advisory, that's fine. But I think that to get the most benefit from this group, I think that they should be in an advisory status for council. I want to hear what this demographic has to say. So planning board is an advisory board. We don't have any boards that are not advisory. They all give us their opinions, or HPB, same thing. I remember we did Peggy and Jerry may remember this, I don't know, Jerry, if you were on at the time, we had a budget advisory board that we put together, and this board went through and they did a lot of work on the budget and how we were, different categories of spending and stuff like that. And they came back with recommendations. And we took some and we didn't take some. We had a charter advisory board. They came back. And I will tell you, I think some of my greatest learnings have been from these boards that come back that have been out there working in a world or working on a project that we can't drill that deep into. Staff doesn't have the time to drill that deep into.
And they bring back a perspective and new information and new insights that are so valuable to the putting it in the hopper to create policy. It's more information, it's stuff that we may not have had before. I think there's a huge challenge with every community now is dealing with this challenge, with this chasm between generations, because it's there. Those of us that grew up with communication at this type of, one style, and then this other group that has communication at a completely, okay, I go on Instagram, but I don't understand anything about it. But it is a primary communication mechanism for an age group. These people are talking to each other and they're affecting change. Watch what's happened on the national level. Watch what happens in national politics. And there's a power within this group. And so I think that they are worth being heard. I think that creating an area for them to support what we're doing, to provide information. I think the marriage with Envision is with the comp plan it's natural. It's perfect. But I don't see that as being their only job. I think look what we're working on with the short-term rentals. I'd like to hear from this is the group that may use a lot of them, or how they, we're dealing with, we had the housing study came in. I'd love to hear this group sit down with the housing study at one of their meetings and come back and give their input on that. We have been listening to a large demographic that is, most cities have. We know that Littleton is the second oldest suburb in the state. And so our demographic is very much aged. And I think having this come in and give us some information from a new perspective, some of it may coincide. It may match. We may find that there's some things going on there that we never knew, but we don't know any of that. This allows that to happen. What I do want to see, I really would like to see, and this would be something maybe the group could even work on or the council could even provide some input on, is what are the criteria that will be used to determine whether or not this group continues. So it's not just go out there and, we need to have some roadmap as to, okay, these are the things that we have an expectation, and maybe that's part of what we can work on. If we bless this, that we can work on some of that or come back with some ideas, or maybe form the group and meet with the group, have one of our breakfasts and talk about that. And that may be help you with some of your concerns to just, and Jara and Carol too, to align with more of what our expectations would be, and then how that would coincide with what they would be able to provide. So I think it's worth going for. I think it's worth trying. I like the 2-year thing. There's some tweaks in the content I'll send you later, but that's my input. And I'm going to go first to, Carol, did you? Okay, Peggy, and then Kyle.
So I think several things that you said, some others that are important. People change as they age. When you're 15, it's one thing, 16, one thing, 17. Go to college or not, go in the service, 17, whatever. You get out, but during all that, you have experiences. When you go to college, you tend to come out different. Sometimes just much more enriched version, like a growing oak, you haven't changed all those things. Sometimes it's like somebody waved a magic wand and you're transformed into another being entirely. And if you go to grad school, you might change again. You have kids somewhere in there, or you might change again. The whole thing is evolving. So if we need, I'm pulling this in several directions, if we need to be using different media to engage people, then by golly, we ought to be doing that. We need to talk to 11th graders, 12th graders, kids after they've been to college and come back in the first summer, and they think they knew everything. Well, they do know everything at that point. Then after they graduate, when they realize they didn't know everything quite yet. But just engaging people as many ways as we can across the ages continuously. Of course, we're not all going to be on council that continual time, but thinking about the ways we continually engage and encourage people to let us know their ideas and how we can make Littleton be better for them, their children, parents. And I think that's what we need to be thinking about, much more than a focused something, which seems to me more narrow.
I agree with the very first part of what she said, because I think that's how this group would operate. We would get advice on how to engage. You know, we don't know. I mean, do you know what media we should use to reach a 23-year-old? How would you figure out that information? I think having advice from that group is important. That's where I agree with the mayor that this group is an advisory group. You know, despite some of our youthful appearances in this room, I don't think anyone in this room is under the age of 34. Maybe one.
I don't think we necessarily need the group to tell us that. I think it would be very easy to get that, I think.
But I think that's what we're looking for, is to get advice on what this group is thinking, how they're operating, for us to better serve the community as a whole. And so and I think this idea of this ambassadorship might be an ancillary project that comes out of it, or just evolves organically out of it. But I think the role of this group is to provide us advice for making policy for the city.
You actually touched on this a little bit, where you said you've had advisory committees in the past on budget, etc. And again, right now, this is a next generation advisory committee on what? And some of the what is communication and engagement. So again, for me, if we limit it to that scope and intent as an advisory committee for communication and outreach to this broader audience in this demographic, or even beyond, that's where I can get more comfortable with this. But right now, we're saying they're an advisory committee, but it could be on anything. And I think what we're really trying to say is it's an advisory committee to help us engage with this demographic. And that's where I can get more comfortable. And that's why this ambassador fits right into that.
And that answers one of my questions. What are we trying to fix?
I don't think we're trying to fix anything, but I also don't think that this is just about having these 5 or 6 youngsters tell us how to reach the others. This is about them doing some of this outreach, them bringing that perspective, gathering that information, and it being bigger than that. It's not. I don't see. I mean, we could hire a 20-something and set them down on a computer and say, okay, hit the millennials, and then whatever is younger than the millennials, go. But that doesn't advise on policy. Like one of the.
Giving yourself away.
Well, they don't have readers, so I just aged out of the millennials.
Special reading lessons.
Indeed.
They're cool.
Thank you, fashion. One of the working objectives is the transit and transportation issues. I think that's really important with the transportation committee that we're doing. I think that, as Mark said, that perspective. I mean, my niece is the same thing. She just turned 21 and she just got her driver's license. Really? So there's a different way, and we are not planning the city for me to age out of the city. We are I mean, the things we do, as you guys well know, we don't do anything today that happens tomorrow. What we do today happens in 10 years. This stuff takes a long time. The big changes, right? The city planning, the master plans, the road changes, all of those things. And so when you make those decisions are being made for future major users. And so I think that perspective, I mean, in addition to, public forums for engagement on different topics, a lot of times when we have these public forums, and I know that with the developers, when they hold their meetings, you don't get this demographic showing up at those. And if we've got this committee, and then they show up at those, for example, I think it was the Enter, when Evergreen, and they did theirs, and when you look at the responses that they got, it really is not a cross-section of our community. It really is not. There is a huge demographic missing. I can see these guys playing a role there. Carol?
I think we're 30 minutes behind
Yeah,
schedule.
we are.
Let's consider moving on.
Indeed. Well, let's run around, and if everybody, we need 4 nods for Kyle to move forward. Peggy, you're a no?
Yes.
Pat? Kyle? I'm a yes. Jerry?
Yes.
Carol? No. Karina? Doesn't matter.
Maybe.
Okay.
But she should go on record. We shouldn't just discount someone.
We're not voting.
I know, but we should go on record on if we're
Karina,
all.
do you want to?
I can support this with some controls.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
So I would ask both of you,
Yeah.
get with me,
Sure.
email me, and let me know your concerns, and we can try to.
You bet.
Excellent. Yay, good. All right.
What are we talking about now?
Now,
The main event.
Sign code?
now the main.
No!
Let's do that one again.
You can find it on Instagram or
Snapchat. Yeah, I don't even know what I'm
You're going to bring up AOL or something?
One person said, Twitter is where celebrities yell at each other, and Facebook is where grandparents look at pictures of their kids.
Yeah. Kind of what I'm hearing from my kids.
Yikes. All right, Steve.
Mayor, Council, we are back tonight to talk about short-term rentals and really just a couple of items. I'm Steve Kemp, the attorney, and with me is Jocelyn Mills, our Community Development Director. And what we're asking you tonight is to provide us some final direction on key issues for the final drafting of the short-term rental code. This is scheduled for second read on the January 15th council meeting. And so we will prepare the final draft. Because it will change some from the original first introduction, it will be published after, should council adopt it. And sort of starting at the beginning, there's a couple of points I think are really important to make clear. First, the city has licensed and had short-term rentals. And in fact, they were permitted under our code. What we're really talking about tonight is creating what I would call an enhanced regulatory structure. Prior to this being reviewed by council, literally the only regulations we had was a requirement in the sales tax code for a license. And so this is really designed to create a much more formal, enhanced regulatory structure. The other point that's very interesting is recently a Colorado Court of Appeals decision came out, which was also cited by the Texas Supreme Court, which is really unusual to have a state Supreme Court cite a Court of Appeals case, finding that short-term rentals were not a commercial business, but really another form of residential use. So really we're talking about a structure to address a particular type of residential use. And as you'll recall, we created 3 objectives that we looked at initially, and I'll let you address those, Jocelyn.
Yeah, just for context, just to remind you that these are the 3 objectives that we have maintained throughout the conversations and all of the elements in the draft code: maintain the community character, ensure public safety, and creation of a formal process and program. So that, just to remind you, those are the contexts by which you're talking about these elements tonight. And then briefly, our agenda here is, Steve said, we want some direction on some outstanding issues, and then to go through a quick high-level overview of some next steps.
And so, Mayor, Council, the first issue to resolve is the what we've defined as the question of residency. And we've brought to you previously two options. One is a requirement that if you have a short-term rental, it must be your primary residence for a period of 8 months. And that is a very common provision both in Colorado and elsewhere. A different alternative would be a provision that the owner of the short-term rental must reside in the city with a limit on the number of licenses that they could obtain. For example, there are some jurisdictions where the owner must reside in the city and they are limited to 1 license or 2 licenses. And that would be a different approach. And so the question that I'm posing to you tonight is A, do you want to take the primary residence approach or some other approach? And then, assuming that council was to take, depending on the approach, envisions a couple of other questions. So I guess at this point, I'm looking for some consensus from council as to, do you want to take the primary residency approach in this code or some other approach?
Okay. So I think the best way to handle this is just we'll go around the table and I think indicate your preference, and then once we've kind of got a read on that, we can have some conversation. Does that sound fair?
Sure.
Karina?
So my position is owner resides within the city. And the reason for that is we're starting from a point of, as Steve said, this is already permitted. Some of our concerns has been, how do we limit this? Because right now we don't in any way. So I think this is a reasonable next step and level of limitation. That one, the owner resides in the city of Littleton, so they have a vested and an understanding of the community values of Littleton as they are a part of it, with the addition that we had put on this, that it was limited to 1 license. So that to me is the most reasonable way forward.
Carol?
I am in favor of primary residence.
Fair.
Primary.
Primary.
Owner resides in the city.
I'm really torn on this one because I love all the arguments from both sides of the people. So I've come to the realization I'm still going to stick with primary, but I do think I'd like to extend the grandfather date maybe out 2 years, and instead of just doing it for 1 year, 2020, maybe go to 2 years and allow those to be non-owners.
Peggy?
Primary.
Mayor, based on that consensus, right now in the current draft ordinance, the grandfather date was January 1 of 2020. That was a number that we had initially discussed with the council, but grandfathering on these types of things many times can be a longer period. This really is a council policy call, whether it is January 1 of 2020, which is less than a year away, or for example, January 1 of 2021 would be almost 2 years. And so based on the determination of primary residence, I would be looking for consensus from council as to what should be that deadline date for individuals to come into compliance with the primary residency requirement.
Okay. So one second, before we go directly into that, we have just in our round robin here, 5 that are supporting primary and 2 that are not. So Karina got to speak a bit about her choice. Do you want to?
Well, I think having the owner reside in the city alleviates concerns of investors from outside buying in property, taking up housing stock, and not necessarily being kind of absentee landlords. I think the way these are used is oftentimes, not all the time, is the whole house is rented out, and someone, maybe it's 6 months out of the year, maybe it's whole year. I have a hard time distinguishing between a long-term rental. Why are we not limiting long-term rentals then, why does a long-term renter not have to have, limits on that when there's a short-term rental? There are types of residency in a residential zone. And so I think that is overly restrictive to require the person lives on site and rent out the rooms. A majority of these short-term rentals are not operated in that fashion. And I can understand this, that that's a way we want to completely get rid of short-term rentals. But I emailed the city attorney, I believe it was just yesterday, about perhaps a compromise of having a cap on the non-primary residences. If we would say there would be X number allowed in the city limits that are not primary residences, and then everything else beyond that would have to be a primary residence. I don't know if that would be a reasonable compromise. Does someone consider that? I don't know what that number looks like.
Well, I would have huge issues with that. I think that you bring up, I think that there's an antitrust issue there. I think that you're creating a monopoly, creating exclusivity with 40 that isn't, it's separating the market out. And I would have a real problem with doing that. I get where your head's at on it, but I would have a real problem with that. Okay, we had hands. Carol, then Peggy, then Karina.
I think we've already had this discussion at least once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times.
Maybe more.
If we're going to have this discussion again tonight, I can make my counterpoints, but what I would propose is that we all remember the points that have been made and move on.
Very good.
Primary is where we are then.
Peggy?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm doing what you're telling me not to do. One of the comments that I received was about someone who has 5 units, doesn't live in any of them, but has 5 houses that are used this way. Makes no sense to me. That is not concept.
That is the kind of comment that I was suggesting that we not do again.
Sorry. Karina, did you have a?
I guess I just wanted to.
If we continue with this, then it's my turn to make my point. Sorry, but I had suggested that I not go forward on this argument. But if we are going to go forward on this argument back and forth again for at least the 4th time, then it's my turn.
You've made that clear.
I guess.
No,
I think Carol.
No, I have something to say. If we're going to give arguments, I want to.
Well, I don't know. Are you giving an argument?
No,
Karina?
no. I wanted to acknowledge the point that Kyle made, that if we, by allowing it to be primary residence, then it essentially eliminates this. It to a significant degree eliminates this use. So I just was going to reiterate that.
That's
making a point. Sorry.
So I hear what you're saying, Carol, and I think that, we have at least enough direction for Steve to put that together in that regard. Now you're asking for this.
Yes.
And I think there has been some conversation about moving that to 2021. Was that?
Yes, that would be.
So let's run around the room and see how that holds up. Karina, would you be, I think you had originally wanted a longer period, and it came in at a shorter period. This would be adding a year.
I would be supportive of extending this to another year for 3.
No.
Well, the proposal of that host, what was the purpose of the outsource, I forgot the name of it, is to get information.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to get. And I think at minimum it should be 2 years so that we have the time to come back and say what, if anything, needs to change.
Carol.
I'll stick with 2020.
Jerry.
I'd go to 2022.
22?
I like round numbers. Yeah, that gives people, if someone has to dispose of something, it gives them.
And this is only for the 10 that have licenses, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
3 years.
I would do 2021. Kyle?
I would extend it, 21 or 22 works with me.
21's fine.
Peggy?
Sooner the better.
Okay, 2021.
Good. Moving.
Next.
So the next issue that I am asking for your guidance is the existing draft ordinance. We have an occupancy requirement of 200 square feet per person, and you have to meet all required building codes. Now, the issue that this poses is if we take a 4,000 square foot house and we divide 4,000 by 200, that in theory you could fit 20 people if they had 4,000 square feet of livable space. You have to keep in mind that unless a garage meets certain building code requirements or a basement meets certain building code requirements, they don't count as livable space. We're really just talking about the physical house itself. But the question that is posed is, many cities will have a maximum number of occupants for short-term rentals. And they'll say you can do a short-term rental and it's 200 square feet per person, but a maximum of X. And the question that I am asking council is, do you want to add a maximum of whatever X is to this proposed code?
So let's turn around and just answer the question about do we want to add a maximum and not try to figure out a number right now? No? No?
Yes.
Limit the maximum.
Yes.
Do we have a maximum on primary residence or long-term rentals?
Well, right now, in the code, what we would provide is there's no maximum for families. But if you, in addition to a family, are limited to 5 unrelated people in a house. Now, a family could be 20 people in a house, and there's no limit. The only limit is what's in the building code, which is you basically have to have 150 feet of livable space per person. But that's the only limit.
No. Yes.
Peggy?
We're asking it for a limit, yes.
Yes, we have a
Okay, answer is yes. Do you want to bring back a number based on something, or do you think we should hash through that?
And council, I would like to do a little research and bring you back.
Thank you.
I think I can do some research and bring you back an appropriate number for a discussion at second reading.
Okay.
Now, a couple of other things that we have addressed in the ordinance. One is, in the initial ordinance that we proposed, we had a $45 cost for the operator's license. What we've determined is that if we were to use host compliance, which we certainly recommend, and we'll address that in a couple of minutes, we think that there are many good reasons to do that. That adds an additional $85 to that fee for a short-term rental. And then the notice requirements and things that we have added to the ordinance, we estimate that the fee necessary right now, without having done any fee study or anything, the minimum fee necessary to recover all costs is $150. Now, as we told you previously, we're going to be still doing the fee study, and if the fee study shows more, we'll address them. But right now, our recommendation is that the ordinance should include a $150 fee. We've also added, I had a council member ask, did we address violations? Yes, as you'll recall, we addressed violations both with the imposition of administrative penalties up front that can then be appealed, as well as the possibility of prosecuting offenses in municipal court. So we have, and we've included a ratcheting effect that we will consider prior violations in the past 3 years in approaching of civil penalties. So I think we have addressed those concerns. We do have one other concern. The council added a provision that when we would consider a short-term rental license, that we would provide 14 days of written notice to property owners within 300 feet. And one of the things that we feel that if we go with host compliance is, host compliance will give us a lot 24-hour, 365-day hotline. They also have local and owner contact information online that any property owner can reach. Quite candidly, we think that the 14-day notice of a possibility of issuing a license really doesn't serve, the purposes of issuing a license. We think it also probably creates some degree of administrative overkill, but it's something that if council wants, we will certainly do it. But we are asking for your guidance on whether you would be prepared to authorize us to take that provision out of the proposed ordinance and let us deal with this issue through the use of host compliance.
And I think the other piece to add to that is there is another section in the existing draft that does require once we are about to issue that short-term license that we do provide that contact information, both owner and the local contact to the adjacent property owner. That section is still in the draft ordinance.
Say that again, Jocelyn?
So the other piece, by taking out the 14-day notice, does not there's another section that talks about once we're about to issue that short-term business license and operator license, that we notify the adjacent property, the immediate adjacent properties of that property with the contact info, both the owner and the local contact. So that provision is still in the draft.
That the city does that, or that the property owner does that?
I believe that it's written that this is a property owner. We would help facilitate making sure that that would occur.
A quick question on this. Is this, I might be getting things mixed up, but there was a issue about the neighbors having an opportunity to give input back. Is that what this is?
Yes,
okay.
That was what this was.
Okay.
And we quite honestly don't do this. We don't do this with sales tax licenses. We don't do this with other forms of license. And certainly if we find that this is a problem, we would be prepared to come back to you and make recommendations. But we feel with the other provisions and the use of host compliance that we will be able to address this and provide adequate protection for the neighbors. And we think that this actually is just going to add time, cost, and complexity to a process that we think would be better served focusing on making sure that these are good neighbors.
Okay, council, these two recommendations, everybody okay with those showing up in the
I
ordinance?
think my brain went someplace. Who's being notified of what when?
What would happen is that if there's a proposal to issue a license, we would have to notify within 300 feet all of the property owners.
So,
We, the city.
The city.
right, but, so, if somebody adjacent sells their property, somebody buys it, then they've got to beware of where they're buying.
Yes. So our recommendation is okay. And so now, in terms of next steps, obviously this week coming to you on January 15th, 2019.
You went with Peggy somewhere.
For the second meeting. How was your vacation? Now, it's important to note that if council were to adopt this, then we will be we are working on an implementation process because there are some connections here. We have a business license, we have this license, and the moratorium that is currently in place expires on the morning of January 15th. And realistically, it takes several days for these to be processed. So assuming that council adopts this ordinance, we will be creating an implementation process. But realistically, because of the mechanics of this and making sure that we have all the paperwork and all the things in place, short-term rental licenses actually aren't going to be issued until sometime after February 1, because we just have to have the necessary things in place, and that's moving at a very rapid speed. And part of that, allowing us to move at a rapid speed, is to look at short-term rental management, and I'm going to let Jocelyn address the real issue of why host compliance, what it adds to this process, and why we as staff, we've already been in discussions with them on a proposed contract, and why we think this is an integral part of a short-term rental management
So
process.
let me ask you, is there a policy decision on council's part regarding
You've addressed
this
this.
compliance?
No, this was just more an overview of, these would be the services we would be using.
So council, you guys are recommending that you do this, this is not.
We are recommending this. We will have primary residence with the 8-month period. We will have grandfathering to 2021, and we will make those two adjustments.
Right, but on the host compliance, you guys just gonna give us some info on this right now, right? This
That's
is,
correct.
we're gonna hire these guys.
Yes.
Yes.
Right?
That's the
Okay.
intent.
All right, so let's keep this brief, please.
Yeah, right, really, it's quick. It was in the packet. These are the 4 pieces that we're gonna use them to help us manage this program. And we feel that they have some really great opportunities that they offer, both the permitting and manage and working through managing of that, looking at compliance monitoring, and really that hotline, I think, will be a really tremendous benefit to support the program without adding staff capacity to manage that piece.
The fee for host compliance, is it per license or is it a set fee? I mean, if it's $10,000 to manage it and we only end up getting 6 licenses here, that's going to be
Yes, it's basically based on how many short-term rentals they find that we have in the city. They do it based per.
So they basically.
So they monitor the websites then?
Yes.
To see
Yep.
who's advertising it? Okay.
The other thing this will do for the city is, this is going to also allow us a source of data. So we will be able, in a year from now, to provide you much better data as to exactly what does the short-term rental market in Middleton look like. And so this will be the other thing it gives to us, is this ability to have much better data than we do right now.
Both for you as the policymakers and then also as staff, when we're dealing with code enforcement or other pieces like that, they will really get us a lot of that detail that's needed to take those projects on.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, looking at host compliance, it does, I mean, yeah, they base it on generically the number of them, but there are flat fees for all the different. It looks like it's going to be up to 50, you're getting up to $10,000 a year. I mean, I'd like to see some better numbers on this, because if we only have 50 units here and we're spending.
They, on their cursory look, they feel that Littleton has about between 96 and 100 actually short-term rentals operating today.
How many? 96 to 100?
Without license?
Yeah, that's about right. I'll look at those.
We have 10 with license.
Yeah. And then it's basically $80 a unit, but you're right, there's a flat fee that they would require, so it's about $8,000.
That's just for the hotline.
No, that's their total.
Full service package.
Full service, thank you.
Yeah.
Karina?
Just a quick consideration, I understand Inglewood's also going through this process right now. Might host compliance be a shared resource? Because again, some of the borders, something to think about, just came up as, if there's a flat fee, I wonder if we can partner with a jurisdiction to share that flat fee.
Much further discussion on that.
That's fine, just a reaction to that comment. I want to come back to the 150 fee and actually the point of what are the implications if there's a violation? Where is the point of being proactive and ensuring that don't mess up because it's going to be a problem for you? Where is that language?
Towards the end.
Council, if you look at page 11 of the draft ordinance, the subsections 1 through 4 create basically a series of administrative sanctions that can be imposed for violations of this code. Now, subsection G actually also makes it a misdemeanor. What the intent would be that if we have violations that are not public safety related, we would impose the administrative sanctions. If we have a violation that's public safety related, for example, someone who has engaged in construction without a permit, and they've done significant electrical and plumbing work, we're going to do whatever we have to do to get that permitted and inspected. That is a life safety issue, and because it's a life safety issue, if that means prosecuting someone criminally in the municipal court, we're going to do it, because public health is at stake. On the other hand, if we have somebody who failed to obtain a license, then my preference would be we would impose the administrative sanctions and fine them. They would have to pay that fee in addition with the license fee. And my experience has been with administrative sanctions, that usually has the deterrent effect that people get their licenses.
Any other questions?
Mayor, Council, we will be back to you on the 15th with this ordinance.
So I drive by a home, and I don't know if it's a short term or not, but it sure looks like it. Sometimes there's one car there during the week, and then by weekend there's 6 cars.
Yes.
Different cars all the time. And what ends up happening is somebody puts the trash out on a Sunday night, and it sits out there all week until the trash is picked up. In this case, it's Thursday or Friday. I mean, that's not fair to the neighbors. I don't know if anybody's calling that in, but this really pits neighbors against neighbors.
And those are the types of things where A, with host compliance, we'll know whether it's a short-term rental, and then B, we can focus our methods on addressing that. I completely understand. If the trash pickup day is Thursday, it's actually a public health issue, again, for us to have trash out for 5 to 6 days. What we want to do is make sure that owner knows, don't be putting your trash out until 6 p.m. on Wednesday night.
But we have 80 of them out there now that don't seem to care if they get a license or not.
Well, that is true, but sometimes that may be a lack of awareness or whatever. My expectation is that, again, as council passes this, we are going to be notifying those 80 or whatever number of the responsibility to get licensed, and we are going to be very, very thoughtful and diligent about getting those folks licensed or getting that use.
So when we started talking about this issue a while back, there's about 10 licenses.
Yes, we have 10 licensees.
So how many have come roaring in to get licenses since?
Well, they haven't been able to because we've had a moratorium.
Well, the moratorium, that's right.
Yes, but
generally, I would say generally in communicating with other communities about like what worked when they were implementing these programs to start, it really is about, to your point, about creating that communication and that outreach to them to let people know, because oftentimes many people don't even recognize or realize that they're need to get the application or the license.
Brandon and Peggy.
So that sounds like an example of actually a primary residence. So the primary residence isn't solving that issue.
We don't know.
I don't know.
No, I'm saying that
Could
sounds
be.
like if there's somebody there that's one car during the week and then they're renting out for the weekend, that sounds like it might be a primary residence, but that issue is still going to be. So I don't think it solves anything.
Peggy?
So I think somewhere I'm agreeing with someplace. So we
Check in
have,
with Pat.
again, we've postponed implementing requirements until
We have the moratorium until we get this settled.
So someone will have all this time during the moratorium to keep potentially having 4 or 5 of these residences.
The moratorium ends on the 15th, and at the point that host compliance is hired, if these people have not, they've got to be advertising it online. They will find them, and if they are not registered with us, then we will know where they are and we can go.
Well, so they have to register. But the owner of the property, I'm not saying this right, probably, doesn't have to live on the property. So someone can indeed have 4 or 5. How long will someone be able to have 4 or 5 of these units?
If council adopts this ordinance, what will happen is the 10 existing licensees will be grandfathered in. if that person is unlicensed, which I believe that they are, because I've looked at the list of existing licensees.
Grandfathered in until
2021.
if we vote on, if the ordinance passes that it goes to 2021, we're giving them 2 years, those that are there. Everybody else.
But if they don't have a license, and I'm suggesting that these.
I mean, I'm assuming, well, I don't know if they do
No,
or not.
if they
but-
don't.
But if they have 4 or 5 places,
And I would tell, I'm not aware of any of our licensees having 4 or 5 places, so my expectation is they may well be unlicensed, in which case the primary residence requirement is going to become effective upon publication, and they're going to either have to have primary residence, or they're going to be in violation of the code. Now, obviously, we're interested in compliance, but if you're unlicensed and you're not a primary resident, we're going to follow the policy direction that you 7 give us, and we are going to implement that diligently.
so somebody shows up tomorrow to get a license.
They won't get a license until
I mean, it
the
goes into effect right away. I mean, they can't get it.
They can't get it, and if they show up on the 16th, we're working on an implementation process.
I'm talking about they show up tomorrow morning.
No way. Moratorium still in effect.
Just clarify.
Yeah. So we will, council, this will obviously show up next Tuesday. It's our second reading, and it will be a public hearing. So between now and next Tuesday, no doubt, we will be hearing from those in the community that have a opinion. Let's make sure that we relate those emails back to staff. I think if they're addressed to all of us, perhaps Peggy, do you mind just, if we're all on the address line, you can send it to staff? If it looks like you're an individual on there, because otherwise staff gets them from, it just gets crazy. So we'll operate, try to be as efficient as possible there. And then I think we'll have a pretty large public hearing, and so we'll put together some rules of organization for that. I would ask council, if between now and our meeting next week, you have ideas that you want to make amendments or something like that, I would suggest definitely run them past the city attorney. Make sure that all of that gets vetted through like we've done in the past. It's going to be really important for this. And then also to consider that if you, I think, be prepared to, succinct in your comments at the meeting too. See, 9 o'clock, that is my witching hour, 9 o'clock thing. So, very good, got through that. One more. So we have a couple housekeeping items to quickly run through with the city attorney. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first, Mayor, Council. I am asking the mayor.
May I? I'm sorry. Yes, I forgot. I wanted to let council know that you received in your packet a review of information that was returned from mayors. I reached out to the caucus and I received 18 responses back. You only had 6 show up, and I am going to work with Sama on making sure that all of that data gets put in there, because I think there's some really interesting, these are also policymakers. Some are struggling with it, others may not be, but there's some interesting comments. Oh, please be quiet. There's some interesting comments and there's some interesting approaches. So I want to make sure that you guys get that, because I know that's been one of the things we've asked for, is what are other municipalities doing. So the one you have in here is not accurate. You'll get a new one in your next packet that will be better. So I'm sorry, Steve.
No problem. Mayor, Council, the first item is, I have asked the mayor regarding scheduling an executive session on a property acquisition that we are looking at, and I'll be asking for your direction on how to proceed. And so that will be done in accordance with all the notice provisions in the new charter amendment, so there'll be specific language on the agenda regarding that. And I've asked ask the mayor if we could schedule that prior to the next council meeting.
But we have to go in the meeting to
But you have to, yes, you can't do anything, and frankly, this is not at a point where I'm gonna be asking anything more than to discuss it with you as well as with the city manager, and then recommending an approach. We're not anywhere close to approving anything, but it is something where, obviously, if you were to say, nope, there's no reason to further discuss it. So it's at a point where we need to obtain some initial direction so we know how to proceed with it. But we're not anywhere close to
So our
it.
meeting would begin at 6:30, or were you saying an early start meeting so we can go in and
Early start.
I would suggest 5:30, and we could provide dinner. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to talk through this. I think you've got a pretty heavy agenda for the 15th. To have an executive session at the end of that meeting, I don't think will serve you well.
Brina? A question on process. Don't we have to vote and make a decision to go into an executive session? Okay, so don't we have to do that at the public hearing? Or a public meeting?
Yeah, we open
That's
our
what I was
meeting
just
at
saying.
So you're extending the public meeting?
No, we're going to have an early start, 5:30.
Yeah,
Then we go in, vote on going into executive session.
And then we go into an executive session right away?
Yeah, and then.
Reconvene at 6:30.
The regular meeting.
Or wherever.
So it's kind of like having a special meeting, you're gonna vote if you vote by a majority, you go into executive session, you go into executive session, you'll come back out of the executive session and proceed into your regular meeting.
And this particular issue is not going to require us to come out of exec and have any conversation at the dais. This is not, some will, this one is not one of those. And honestly, we wouldn't even worry about doing it on this particular meeting, except that there is a timeliness issue that's involved, so.
So now we have to be careful that we don't go into a vote, because if we do.
We won't.
You're not going, your lawyer is going to
There's
say,
no
no,
voting,
no,
this is
no,
land negotiation.
We can give
That's all
direction.
You
this
can
is.
give
It's
direction, and that's all you do. is
So the
giving-
notice that will be going out is that the meeting start time is at 5:30. So that's the public notice that's going out, that there is a council meeting starting at 5:30, and anyone can show up at 5:30, and we're going to say, we're going to an executive session. You can please wait for another hour.
The agenda will say, we'll make it very clear that we will be voting to go into an exec session and will not return to the dais until 6:30 to conduct the regular business meeting. So it will be clear to the public that if they want to come and sit in the chamber for an hour, we'll make that very clear.
I have some hesitation of 5:30 just from a logistic and scheduling for myself personally, and also given that that is going to be a very heavy and long meeting to begin with. I understand the urgency. I mean, can we meet on the 16th, first thing in the morning, or is there another option we can throw out there?
Is it going to take that long? Could we meet at 5:45 or 5:50 or something like that?
I would like to see another option and see how that works. I mean,
Would 6 o'clock be better for you?
yes.
Okay, let's do 6 o'clock and we'll start the regular meeting at 7.
Well, we can still start at 6:30.
Oh, we can start the regular meeting whenever we go to executive session.
We don't have to put a time on it. The regular meeting starts at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Well,
6:30.
yeah, I think we have to have an estimate for coming out. Based on what we've talked about, we believe that we're going to be anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour.
It's a target. Yeah, it's not a have to.
But I think, no, and I think it can say estimated return time 7 o'clock, but I think we need to get a public.
We just don't want to.
We will include appropriate language on the agenda that when the executive session is done, the council can adjourn the executive session and proceed right into the regular meeting. And the city clerk and I, we have already worked out the mechanics on this, so we'll have, and we'll run an agenda by the mayor, so that,
That works. The only, and I also do recognize that, is it after 10 o'clock where we have to kind of pause and say, do we want to continue?
Leading
Yeah, I
up
mean,
to, yeah.
it helps on the front end, but it's really not addressing that it's going to be a long night for all. But I'm kind of seeing you guys keep nodding like we have to have it on Tuesday, can't wait until Wednesday.
Well, you could wait till Wednesday, I guess, but but that's up to the council to decide if you want to come and have a special meeting on the morning
We're
following.
only adjusting this by half an hour.
Just,
So I think there's other calendar challenges on that Wednesday.
I just get her done.
And I'm assuming you still would like dinner offered, I think, at that hour, just trying to get there. Some of you, I realize that's not so much an issue, but if you're coming from work, that could be an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Okay. Next.
Other item, Mayor, is, well, after the planning commission makes its recommendation, we are going to be coming back to you on a study session on the recreational uses, definitions, and how they pertain to gun ranges. This is an item that has come up that I simply want to discuss with you and get your input. And so I've asked the mayor that we schedule that for a study session. And it's basically over the operation of how conditional uses work. And it's somewhat technical. And so without going into any more detail, I just want to give you a heads up. We are going to be coming back to talk to you about that.
And if I may just add to that, because it also relates to another issue. Again, that's a very narrow question on the conditional use permit. So we also are trying to schedule the boards and commission interviews here. And so I think on February 19th is a regular meeting. The only item that we had was basically the second reading of this recreational definition issue. And so we're going to postpone that, clear the 19th, and then look also to the Wednesday that follows to have those 2 days as your interviews for the boards and commissions. So that would be February 19th and 20th, 2 days.
And at this point, we won't know until the 31st how many applications came in, but we are hopeful that we can get it into 2 days.
Yeah, you can hope all you want, but it's going to be 3.
Jared, think too.
I would like to be 2, but it won't, unless we stay later.
That depends on how many we get too.
This is a whole new
We have
4 to 7 transportation.
We do.
Yeah.
So that gives us, though, the next day after if we need to. So I would just say, if you have a conflict with even that Thursday, so clear your Tuesday, and your Tuesday's already cleared. Can you Wednesday night, and then
keep the beer cold.
Keep open Thursday. And if we need it, the 21st.
In all, 19th and 20th, and perhaps even the 21st. And I'll send out an email out tomorrow to kind of clarify the details of this, but that's kind of what we're thinking here.
We'd probably start at 6:30.
5:30 last year.
I know. Well, okay. Then that would be the other question. The earlier we can start, the better I think it is.
You're the one that comes from a distance, isn't it?
So 6 o'clock is very doable for me.
Okay. 6.
Okay, 6 o'clock. Okay.
19th, was it?
19th and 20th.
And
Possibly the
reserve
21st.
possibly the 21st.
Did we serve?
If you're lucky, the 20th. The second too, Jerry, just for you.
Yeah, you do have dinner every night.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll have dinner for the council every night of the interviews there, like we did last year. And I understand you guys actually had fun last year.
Well, we had Valentine's candy.
we did.
All right.
So we'll do that again.
Oh, good.
State wrestling begins on, that's a Thursday.
Oh, dear.
It's real important.
Well, let's see if we can't get out.
Well, we got a big team.
That's okay. I got final tickets already.
Mayor, Council, one other quick item is, you'll know on the 15th of January, we have some amendments by ordinance to the liquor code. And we have dispensed in this case with a study session because these are all really to bring us into conformance with state statute. So while it's a policy decision for the council, it's really one that we want to continue issuing liquor licenses. We need to be in conformance with state statute. So my office has put a memo in the packet that outlines those, but there won't be any study session. We'll be coming directly to you for first read. And it's simply because it's to bring us into conformance with state statute.
That's it here for updates.
Okay. I think that one of you are going to update on the HPV appeal.
Oh, yes, I'll mention that. We do have one other item on the agenda that's a little bit unusual, and that is we had an appeal on a certificate of appropriateness out of the Historic Preservation Board. And the applicant is appealing, but under our code, it requires a limits the council in considering, the only testimony that the council can consider is whether the board abused its discretion. So even though you're going to hear public hearing testimony, unless it directly relates to the board's abuse of its discretion, you can't consider it. What you will get is, and I know, what you will get is a very detailed staff report that will outline the board's action, the basis for the staff recommendation, the board's reasons for that the board took its action, and you will be asked to determine whether the board abused its discretion, which we'll get into a very quick discussion that night of what it means to be either arbitrary, capricious, or unreasonable, which are the three fancy legal terms for what abuse of discretion is. And that is literally the only thing the code allows you to consider. So you will either find that the board abused its discretion and overturn the action and order the issuance of the certificate, or you will affirm the board's action, in which case the certificate would not be issued.
So is that how appeals work even for like what goes through the planning commission? So it's, you could only...
No, this is a very unusual appeal provision.
Just for historic preservation?
Yes, it's, I've not really seen anything like it in
No way.
my career. It's an unusual provision, but we will follow the rules and we will make it work and the council will decide however it decides. But you'll get good legal advice to help you out with that.
And that's all public.
It's all public. We're going to do it on the 15th, along with a whole series of second reads, including the Bellevue connection without going into the merits. That will be on your agenda as well.
Are we making our decision on that on the 15th as well?
Yes, you are.
So we're learning and deciding. Yes, I can do that.
Better is the way you sit. I can do that.
Yeah, I can do that.
And the city attorney will be passing out pillows at 11 o'clock.
I can do that, Sheriff.
Okay, so council, just as a double check, have your comments back to Noel.
The end of the day tomorrow.
Oh, for the judge.
Yes, for the judge.
Judge Feldman, just your comments that would be incorporated into the document that goes back to the judge regarding review.
I think my opinion is we are so fortunate to have Judge Feldman. Incredibly fortunate. I mean, we've been through some other cases.
Okay, we're not on the agenda.
Yeah.
I'm still getting my opinion.
After the mayor goes adjourn.
No, because then the meeting continues. I'm leaving.
That wasn't a secret, I'm sorry.
But I agree.
Jerry thinks he can do that.